First of all, it feels like a reunion because many of you were part of the first edition of The Dig, a contemporary speakeasy. And as I said then, it's almost just as applicable now. We were coming out of the pandemic, and it seemed like, and I think we all felt the same way, that it's really difficult when you shut down humanity. It's really hard to deal with that, but also then restarting. So the whole point of The Dig, when we started, was to get people to come together, to break bread, and to tell stories. And that's what we did for 15 consecutive Wednesdays at the back room at the Senate Bar, which for those of you, and I'm hoping that we can make a few opportunities in the future, the speakeasy, the real speakeasy that's downstairs in the Senate. You didn't hear that from me, so don't tell Ken or Gina that there's a speakeasy underneath them. But they have the rum barrel monorails and everything that would roll the barrels down. They have the secret rooms, they have the sliding doors. All of that is down in the basement. So in the future, because it's right downtown across from City Hall, it would make for a perfect, because it is part of the tunnel network. And for those of you that have followed me, in 2016, when I was at First and Main in the historic Tut building, the Ghost Walk had asked me for about 6 years in a row if I would open the tunnels. Because when I first moved into the building, I went into the basement, opened up a door that I thought was a closet. Lo and behold, it was just rooms and chambers and tunnels connecting all throughout downtown. So we opened it up in 2016 for the Ghost Walk. We had 4,000 people come through in 4 nights. It was crazy. And what was fun was whether you were a 5-year-old or a 95-year-old. 5-year-olds are in front of the line. You tell them you're going into the tunnels, 5-year-olds are there. 95-year-olds were just, well, we used to play down there because they were there when we were kids in Pueblo. So it was really fun to bring that back. Now it is somewhat problematic because the city and the planning department, oftentimes those hollow sidewalks are really not very safe. And so it becomes a security and a safety issue. Plus, when you look at the plats, no one really knows who owns that area. Is that the property owner's responsibility or is that the city? There's a lot of interesting things. So in any case, that's kind of how all of this started. And I first want to give thanks to, and Caroline is here. Where's Caroline? Caroline's in the back. Caroline Tranny is the representative for the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And if you don't know Caroline is a seasoned professional in so many different ways, and I have gotten to know her in different roles. But now with the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, they have some really special opportunities for nonprofits and for organizations that are not just working in housing, but also economic development and trying to build communities. And we wrote a grant, and Caroline and her team, it didn't really fit the specific grant, but they said, you know what, this is really important. So we're gonna find a way to fund this. So this year, for 2024, we're gonna have 12 different sessions, and we're gonna be moving them around. This one is unique because, as you see next door, and I'll talk about this in a little while, we're starting what's called Pueblo PopUp, because we lost a lot of businesses, a lot of brick and mortar businesses, for a lot of different reasons. Many still have really good products and services. And we felt, wouldn't it be wonderful if just for 3 or 4 days, we could take over a new, forgotten, abandoned, underutilized space for just a few days and get people in those spaces. And that alleviates a lot of the overhead because, especially in the art world, anyone, and I know Jeff Medine knows very well, I did when I had my gallery on Central Plaza, first Friday, at the opening and the closing, 3 days you knew like 80% of your revenue was coming through. But you had to keep your business open for an entire month. So that can sometimes be really tricky, which is one reason why I decided to convert my gallery, Kadoya Gallery, into a 501c3. So since 2016, we've been funding initiatives with individual artists, with other groups and organizations that are in the visual arts and the performing arts. The Dig was a new way for us to just bring people together, and we use that platform to do that. So I'm really excited. First of all, thank you, Caroline and Chapa, because we wouldn't be able to do this without you. So if you can see this, this was the first series of, we did 15 altogether, 15 Wednesdays in a row. If you haven't seen them, and we have the same fabulous individual, Justin Brager is here, we're gonna be documenting this. Since we're moving around a lot, we're not gonna do the live broadcast, but we're gonna document this and then we'll upload it to the YouTube channel where all of these are located. So if you wanna just revisit those, or if you didn't get to go to all of them, they're all on YouTube. And it's pretty amazing. When we did the broadcast live, we had people in 17 states that were tuning into YouTube at 6 o'clock or whatever time their time zone was, even in Europe and Japan, to listen to these talks. And many of them were old Puebloans who maybe had family here, didn't live here, but wanted to connect back with the city. So again, it's just another way. Community isn't just right here regionally, it can oftentimes extend beyond. And for me, it is the storytelling, which is the most important. But as I said earlier, coming out of the pandemic, it really was a way for us to come together. I don't care if you're blue, if you're red, if you're male, female, anywhere on the spectrum. You know, at the end of the day, those are the two things that we've done since we crawled out of a cave or we crawled from under a rock. So it's sharing stories and breaking bread. We also broadcast live, and for me, and I came to Pueblo, it's almost 15 years now, to open up a network of healthcare clinics. It was originally Rocky Mountain Vein Institute, which is now American Vein and Vascular. And I learned immediately, because we opened up 8 clinics from the ground up in 18 months, 7 in Colorado, 1 in Texas. But I had to be in charge of Canyon City, Vail, Aspen. We had to do Colorado Springs, Parker, Denver, Pueblo, all of these different locations. And each one was very unique in terms of how they got their information. Pueblo was print news and radio. But when I'm up in Aspen and Denver, everyone is using their mobile devices and their iPads and so it was really interesting to learn how people get their information. But at the end of the day, it's always about that authentic and genuine story. And that's really what we focus on at the Dig. My goal is eventually, and we're looking for real estate now, we would love to have a permanent home that would be kind of a dinner theater style location that wouldn't be just exclusively for the Dig, but if you had a conference or if you had a product launch or if you just wanted to bring people together. And it would also be somewhat of a museum, a place that would share a lot of these stories above and beyond just the spoken word. Film, we can do poetry, we can do all kinds, performing arts. So those are just some of the things I'd love for you to just keep in the back of your mind, because we started this right out of the pandemic. Here we are, the 2nd edition, and we're going to be taking it from here. And just to remind you, the 4 platforms, storytelling, video archives, it's really important that we document these stories, not just because they're really interesting and they're fascinating, but if you don't, it never really happened. And it's really important for us to share those stories. And so now, of course, we're all struggling with, and being one of the co-founders of the Pueblo Star-Journal, this notion of print and then podcast, the digital realm, and then going into video. Everyone gets their news, their stories from a different source. And it's really, really tricky to figure out where your audiences are, but it's got to start with a good story. And if you've got a really good story and you're really smart about how you share it, you can share it in print, you can share it digitally, you can share it in video. All of those different platforms are really readily available. Also publication, and then community, of course. Let's move on. So just to give you a little bit, for those of you that don't know me, I'm just going to go through this just quickly, but I arrived here about 13 years ago. As I said, Rocky Mountain Vein Institute, American Vein and Vascular was my kind of, it was a team of doctors that invited me here. My title was Director of Creative Solutions, which basically meant I was doing just about everything, from garbage to site selection to receiving doctors. It was everything, but it was a really fabulous, a call for me to come here and then also to get to know Pueblo. I just feel like many, your car either breaks down on I-25 or there's just something about this town that grabs you. And it's the stories that really have grabbed me. But it was my first gig. Someone asked me, would you like to be on the board at the Steelworks Center of the West? Well, I knew a little bit about the Rockefellers and the Guggenheims and the early empire builders in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. But it wasn't until I got on the board and I started to just dig through their archives. I mean, extraordinary archives. And for me, I have been fascinated by ancestry and just following my family's roots. And when we actually were able to go in and look at the employee records and learn the stories, and in fact, that was one of my first initiatives, was to get families who had never seen like their grandfather or their great-grandfather's employee records, because there's some wild stories that, of course, the managers and corporate bosses would put in those entries. So we actually created a special category that would allow you a membership, and then you could get those records. Because there are, Social Security, there's a lot of other things that are part of that archive that are, of course, private. And so we had to create it in a special way. But some families found out that there was another generation before one that came to Pueblo that they didn't know about. And that's pretty special when you can dig further and further back into your own family history. I started Kadoya Gallery and the Shoe Factory, and then I sat on the Historic Preservation Commission for the city for 4 years, and I ended as being the commissioner. That was a real eye-opener too, because I have people coming into Pueblo all over the world, and I take them on walking tours, and they'll just stop me and say, why is this building here? This building could be in London, it could be in Chicago, it could be anywhere. Why is it here? And then to be able to tell the stories behind it. So it was really interesting to sit on that commission and really learn about private residences and commercial properties, the whole process of nominating a structure and bringing it to the National Register or the State Register or the local register. And Pueblo did something really amazing back in the 1970s, about 1974 to 1976. They nominated over 500 properties for the National Register of Historic Places through the Secretary of the Interior. And I mean, it could possibly, I'd have to look at the numbers, but I'm sure that if you were to look at other cities per capita, how many buildings are actually on the National Register, it's pretty extraordinary. And then, of course, you start digging up the stories about the architects who built these buildings. And we're working on several exhibitions now that will actually be taking place downtown, honoring the original architects. I'm working with the National Building Museum out of Washington, D.C. to start with, because the Pueblo Star-Journal office is in the historic Crest building right across from Solar Rose, which is a fabulous, beautiful building built back in 1939 as part of a national campaign. They have all of the archives, and so we're going to be doing an exhibition called Five and Dime, because that was one of the Five and Dimes, but that whole street from White and Davis, Cruz Beggs, there were all of those amazing department stores down there. And in fact, you'll see some of those pictures actually, they're hanging. They were part of Floyd's collection. And then Water Tower Place and the Rational Factory. I spent about 5 years almost daily there, and I've kind of stepped away because things slowed down, but I was over the other day, and I can't believe all the new construction that's been happening on the second, third, and fourth floors. So it's still moving. I mean, it's been sitting there since 1917, so it's not going anywhere. But once you get inside, it's amazing what's happening, so that's exciting. Yes? We're going to start doing tours. Occasionally I'm able to do a private tour, if there's a group, a small group, but I love doing that. And there's a lot more. I'm just waiting for the right time. So stay tuned. We're in talks right now. I'd love to do them like every quarter, and do a few over a weekend. That's the best way. The city is getting a little bit naughty in terms of, and it's not just us, there's a lot of projects that are happening in town, and the new city government is making things kind of difficult, and it's not pleasant right now. I'm not going to talk about that now, but if you want to learn more, we have a new mayor, and of course there's always going to be transition, but oftentimes that can be one thing and it can be another, and I'll leave it at that. The DIG 2021, the Pueblo Star-Journal, we're going into our third year, which is amazing. We're still monthly. We have 42 pickup locations. We started our podcast last year We have, right now, you have to look at the actual number, but we have 4 actual podcasts. We're getting 70,000 visitors to our website a month now. We're the busiest website in the city. And now we're moving into our 3rd phase, which is video broadcast. We're going to start broadcasting on Fridays. We're in talks with one of our local networks to take over the 12:30 Friday slot after the popular 12 o'clock news to show a 30-minute television program on local Pueblo events and stories, and it will be produced solely by people here in Pueblo. Justin is one of my colleagues up at CSUP. That department, Media and Entertainment, has been really turned upside down. And it's exciting now because now we have a professional advisory council. The classes are actually aligned with what's happening in downtown. So we have so many creators in Pueblo, whether you're a storyteller, whether you're a poet, whether you're a performing arts, whether you're a visual artist, whether you're a performing artist. We have so much talent. What we need to do now is really connect it better. And one of the projects that we're working on is what's called the Storytelling Makerspace. We're all makers here in Pueblo, so it'd be really fun to have a place that's dedicated for making stories. So stay tuned. That's a project we're getting PEDCO, the city, the county, even the governor is really excited. We want to identify content creation as an industry sector, just like we do for healthcare, we do for transportation, we do for industrial hemp. PEDCO and the city and county identify those because we can get additional funding. We have so much underutilized space, infrastructure, that could be beautiful spaces for people to gather, share their talents, and share resources. Because it's really the only way to go when you start looking forward with just costs in terms of education, in terms of equipment and technology. If we can share that, we're so much better off. That's why what CHAFA is doing for us here really gives us a head start in really showing people what we can do, especially with great stories. CSU Pueblo and the Storytelling Makerspace, I already covered this. So this is what this whole talk is about. And what's amazing is I was going through my notes and I found this when I was on the board of directors at the Steelworks Center. And they, as far as we know, CF&I only published this one time. And the chart is from 1923 to 1924. I know this is hard to see, but we have some as a gift. They're in the other room and also on the wall. But what this does is this chart actually breaks down 10,823 employees at CF&I, and it breaks them down by where they worked and by their ethnic group. So the first is Americans, and then group 2 is Mexican. Group 3 is Austrian, Hungarian, Bohemian, German. Then you have group 4, which is, it's really, I've got it right here. English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and then you have Canadian. Then we have group 6, French, Spanish, and then we've got Wales, we've got Italian, Belgian, and Portuguese. Group 7, Negro, African American. Then we have group 8, we have Finnish, Swedish, and then we go to 9, and we've got Russian, Polish, Slavish, Croatian, Lithuanian, and then we have our Asian group, which is Japanese, Chinese, Turkish, and Assyrian. But it's fascinating when you break this down. What's really important about this document, and we're still studying it, is 1924 is also the year that the United States shut its borders to immigrants. The Exclusion Act of 1924, which I'm amazed, and I'm going to show you, immigration is just as hot a topic today as it was 100 years ago. And when you see these cartoons, these political cartoons, they could literally be in the newspapers today. It's really amazing how we have, in 100 years, returned to this time. But we're also going to look in this presentation a little bit at Pueblo in the 1920s, local language and culture. And what I'm really fascinated with, and many of you have probably seen, you probably maybe have seen more than just a few of the images, but John Wilbur Clarence Floyd. You usually see Floyd written in white on his images, and they're extraordinary. And we're finally really digging into them to learn more. Well, I started digging into them because not only the amazing images, but I wanted to know about the photographer. And no one really has his story. So tonight I'm going to share with you, and 2 of the slides about his 3 marriages and how he had to leave the East Coast to come to Pueblo in 1906 are amazing stories. I mean, it could be Netflix, like 6 seasons. I mean, just him alone. So, and then who was Floyd? Photographer. He was a filmmaker. He was one of the earliest individuals who was capturing the moving image in silent films and has multiple patents. The guy was really brilliant. So not only was he a photographer, filmmaker, but he was also an extraordinary entrepreneur. His early years, he was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, as far as what the records can show, but he spent most of his early years in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, and then he was in Pueblo, 1906 to 1930. And that's when most of these images, so when I realized this document was 100 years old, and I look at all of these Floyd images, this was exactly the way Pueblo was 100 years ago. So it adds a really beautiful layer to this whole chart, because it's one thing to look at a chart and look at these numbers and go, wow, look at the numbers of people. And these are just the people that worked at CF&I and related industries. But we had the meatpacking plant, which had a very similar type of workforce. And then we had other industries. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then what's really exciting is we're working on early development of a beautiful coffee table book that will honor the photography of Floyd, Muramoto, Anderson, and Suhaig. We have some amazing photographers. I mean, Ansel Adams, yes, is one of the great masters, but these particular photographers really do rival that class of photographer. And then the future of the past is one of my taglines that I kind of keep using since I first arrived here. The Exclusion Act of 1924. I'm going to give you a little background, because when you hear this and you hear about immigration today, it sounds like they're just echoing the exact same words. And I'm going to do it through images at first, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of background. But basically, this was the 68th Congress. This was April 10th, 1924. An act to limit the immigration of aliens into the United States and for other purposes. These are some of the images that were really popular. The great fear of the period, that Uncle Sam may be swallowed by foreigners. Yes?
So I'm Irish descent. I know that's an Irish guy right there.
It's incredible. And you have an Asian individual on the other side of the world here. Literacy test. I mean, all of these things are resonating today. The Americanese wall. The wall comes back again. This was 1924. As Congressman Burnett would build it. And then, of course, you have this one. This is very famous. This, many of you have probably seen before. But you have Europe with all of these people who want to come to the United States. And you can see Uncle Sam there at the gate trying to, limit those quotas of 3%. And what's amazing is in 1924, the following year, more people left the United States than came to the United States. That's how dramatic it was. This is interesting. I found some local. This is Paul Gregg, and he was an artist for the Denver Post for 47 years, creating sketches, cartoons, and illustrations that captured the spirit of the West. Gregg was born in Baxter Springs in 1876 and died in Denver in 1949. But again, down here, it says, whose United States is this anyway? I mean, these could be in the newspapers today, and there would be almost nothing different. And it's fun. It says new immigration bill. How many times over the last 3 or 4 administrations? I mean, it goes back before that. I mean, it's one of the hardest issues, but just an immigration bill. We keep saying that, and then just most recently, for the first time in, I mean, how many decades, you know, Republicans and Democrats actually came together and put together a bill, and outside forces, of course, determined that this wasn't such a politically, you know, opportune time to carry this forward. So let's quash that. Who knows how long it's going to take? So I'm not going to go into a lot of the details. I will make this available, and of course, this will be available afterwards. But there's some things to really think about because, you know, the Johnson and Reed was the other name. Everyone called it the Exclusion Act of 1924. But Johnson Reed, they were the co-signers who really championed this particular legislation. What's amazing is that this legislation stayed in force until 1965, the quotas. There were some changes along the way, but think about that, 1924 to 1965. A lot of things that we just don't realize. And really it was, you know, it was the civil rights era, it was that era where we really made huge strides in terms of equal rights and in terms of civil rights and things of that sort. So that's when things started to change and they thought, we need to look at this a little bit more carefully. But in the aftermath of World War I, a wave of anxiety washed over the United States. Millions had immigrated in the previous decades, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe. Concerns rose about cultural assimilation, competition for jobs, and even racist ideas about eugenics, the belief in selective breeding. The Immigration Act of 1924 became the response to these anxieties. It almost sounds like today. Slamming the golden door shut. And this has to do with the quota system, which they then based on the 1890 census. So they actually went all the way back to 1890, looked at census data, and then made the quotas based on that. And what happened was, it was very unfair too. They looked at certain ethnic groups more favorably than others. And that was really problematic. That hasn't changed one bit. The human cost. The act's impact was profound. Families were separated, and the vibrant diversity of immigration slowed to a trickle. While some argued it protected American jobs and culture, for many it represented a betrayal of the nation's ideals as a welcoming land of opportunity. You couldn't have written, I mean, this could literally be the talking points for a certain political stream, shall we say, without naming any of them. A turning point, not the end. So the Immigration Act of 1920, it remained in place for decades. It wasn't until the Immigration and the Nationality Act of 1965 that the quota system was finally dismantled. And that's when really we started to see a whole new wave of immigration. What's interesting, and this is just an overview, you're going to see some of these in the images, but you know, Pueblo, Colorado in 1924 bustled with a vibrant mix of ethnicities. While the Exclusion Act restricted immigration nationally, Pueblo's existing communities thrived, each contributing to the city's unique character. And I broke some of these down by the neighborhoods, the Italian immigrants, Mexican immigrants, the Grove. We're in the Grove now, which of course was Eastern European immigrants, primarily Polish, Lithuanian, and Slovak, settled in this area. These communities were known for their close-knit nature, with churches and social halls serving as cultural anchors. If you haven't read, earlier I mentioned that the city of Pueblo in the 1970s nominated just hundreds of properties for the National Register. The other thing that the city of Pueblo did, which a lot of people aren't aware of, I have them on my website, but I don't know if it was an exact cycle, but it was about every 4 or 5 years, the city of Pueblo would allocate, and they actually put out an RFP to do a deep dive study on each neighborhood. And these were like $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 grants. They hired some of the best people. And this was to help with zoning, with planning, really understanding the landscape and the people and really the infrastructure that we have. And these are like 400-page novels of each neighborhood. And what I love about the one on the Grove and Eilers Heights is it's all about churches, and of course, so it's petitza, and it's about ale, it's about drinking, it's all about all of these things. But if you haven't had a chance, there's one on the east side, the south side, there's one on Pueblo Modern. They're all available, and they're just huge and beautifully done and very well researched. So it's that information that's actually used. So for me, when I got to Pueblo, and as I said earlier, I always have felt Pueblo as its worst known storyteller. Why aren't we using these amazing resources? Not only just the archives, which are literally living archives in many cases, but we have these great, great publications. If you go to gregoryhowell.com, my website, I make them all available. You can download the PDFs, and they're just really great resources. They've actually given me permission to publish them as a set. So we're thinking about in the future just making like a box set, and you can read about all the neighborhoods. They've already done the hard work. We might as well do a nice introduction and then repurpose them. The other thing is we have Japanese and Chinese, Syrian. We had a lot of Lebanese residents that were living on the other side of the Grove. If you watched the film that Justin was a part of, he was one of the producers of the Rocky Mountain PBS documentary on the Great Pueblo Flood with Sam Ebersol. Their team did some really great research, and Therese Simony, for example, whose family came from Lebanon, she was telling us amazing stories. And like they say here, Syrian and Lebanese immigrants established businesses throughout Pueblo, but a small enclave near the Arkansas River housed many families. Arabic could be heard alongside English with a focus on family businesses and cultural traditions. And then, of course, we have our uptown, downtown. For those that were the urban folk, you had a real mix. And a lot of it had to do with work. A lot of it had to do because many of the people who were operating a business would oftentimes live on the second floor. So you oftentimes had a real interesting mix of workers. So it's important to remember that these neighborhoods weren't entirely isolated. People from different backgrounds interacted in workplaces, at public markets, and through social events. Pueblo's rich cultural tapestry wasn't confined to specific areas, but rather woven throughout the city's fabric. This is something that's really, we're all pretty aware of the neighborhoods, and it's really special when you can walk and you can still sense or feel. Oftentimes it's rooted in food, which of course is the common denominator in terms of bringing people together. And it's one of Pueblo's great, great assets. John Wilbur Clarence Floyd, the man that we're going to be seeing a lot of his photographs. This is a really rare photo. It's the only one, but there's a librarian in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, because he took over 100,000 images, very similar to what he did in Pueblo. And in fact, now we've unearthed his filmmaking production company. It's Fairyland Motion Pictures Limited. And we've unearthed through the Library of Congress and all throughout the region contracts that this particular production company had with individuals, with corporations, with local governments. Whether a lot of these films actually exist because it was both still and also, moving pictures. That's the next thing that I really want to start diving into, because if we could find some silent films, the problem is a lot of the materials that were used in those early years, much of that has already just been destroyed just by time, by climate, and it's just they were made with certain acetate and things of that sort that unless they're not treated well, but if we can, those can be digitized now and they can be preserved, which is what we did with Muramoto's motion pictures. That was a huge grant that we got from the National Film Restoration Foundation, and we were able to do that. And they're available online. They're in the public library here in the main Rawlings third floor special collections. You can go online and you can actually watch these films that they took in the early 1900s, all by Muramoto. He was very similar to Floyd. But as I said, in 1881, he arrived in Lock Haven, and he was 28 years old. And he purchased an existing photography business. But he became, in a very short period of time, one of the busiest and most popular photographers in town. Floyd appears to have been quite a colorful character. a man with a keen interest in entertainment technology, which is why he had many patents. He, in fact, the one that really is still on the books, and you can go and you can look at it in the Library of Congress and the Patent House, is he created a special system for washing and cleaning photographs. After you go through the first few steps, he developed this amazing system, which was then purchased by commercial and private individuals who were really interested in photography. So it was about form and function. He loved the technology, but he wanted to make it better. So he was creating patents all the time. But what's interesting is he brought recorded sound to Lock Haven when he began selling gramophones at his photo shop, retailing early Edison music recordings and holding phonographic concerts for passers-by on Main Street. So he was just entertaining everyone in town. He also shot silent films for the old Bioscope studio during the earliest days of the movie industry. And he married 3 times during his residence in Lock Haven. Floyd was a tireless self-promoter, advertising frequently in the newspapers of the day and launching publicity stunts that oftentimes went awry. There are so many funny stories about things he would do with hot air balloons and campaigns, and then sometimes they would explode and it wouldn't work out the way that he wanted to, but he would always just laugh and he would continue and do more. But this is a really wonderful photograph of him. There are stories, and I would have to validate that he was of mixed race. And in fact, he had lots of situations where he had to flee certain places on the East Coast because of his mixed race. But when he got to Pueblo, he just fit right in. He really just fit right in. So I'm going to show you some pictures just of some of them, and I'm going to share a little bit more. This is from 1913, the city championships. Lithias is actually a bottled water. It was a medicinal water that was sold here in Pueblo, and they were the sponsors for this team. All of these photographs are in the room next door, and take time because we reproduce them as close as we could to what the photographs are, and some of them are extraordinary. They're almost creepy because they look three-dimensional, and sometimes the way that the focus works is you'll have a little bit of unfocused in the front, and then you'll have a focused middle, and then an unfocused back. So it's really interesting. He was very well known for some of his techniques. This is the bottle. If you ever find bottles in Pueblo, that's the Lithias. But the Lithia Water Company was known to have healing elements. So we have Clark Spring Water, same time, 1880s, which is an artesian well that goes down 4,600 feet. Still, is it what? Oh, it's only 1,300? Well, now it's 1,300, but someone told me that it was much deeper when they first, yeah. But, and I think, is it 4th generation? Eric is 4th generation. He's 5th. It's amazing. And when I first met him, he says, I'm Eric number 5. So, but it was marketed as a medicinal mineral water. The critical element is lithium salts, which supposedly improve the mood of those imbibing. It shares some elements with the antidepressant lithium. I will leave it there. So I'm not going to read all this. Just came to me just recently, and I just dropped it in. But just to give you, these are the marriages that this very, very festive and fun, innovative guy. But he married for the first time Irma L. Gast. To make a long story short, he ended up marrying these very famous, well-known women from families that were very, very wealthy. But sadly, this wedding, it was cut short by tragedy as Irma died a few months after the flood of 1889, probably of typhoid, very young. 3 years later, he gets married in 1886 to Jessie Batchelor. She was the daughter of a very prominent local business person. And that wedding was, of course, covered. I'm getting all of these photos and documents from this librarian in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. She says, no one has asked for these images in decades. So, and then I told her I was from Pueblo, so they want to see what we have, and then we can collaborate and share our collection, because they have over 100,000 images that have never been inventoried or archived. They have about 200-some thousand photos that he did when he was there. But he had bad luck with his second wife as well. She lived only to age 24, and she passed away on March 31st, less than 4 years after they exchanged vows. And then in 1906, he married for the last time to Blanche Bickford, and she too was from a very, very wealthy family, but she had worked for him for many years, and she used to retouch all of the photographs. So they had a relationship, for quite a professional relationship, for quite some time. But they then immediately left for Pueblo, and they arrived here in 1906. We still don't know exactly why. I've heard stories that because of the marriage, because the family wasn't so happy, there's all these wild kind of, stories from these towns. So we're kind of digging into that right now to find out why they made this huge change from, Lock Haven, Pennsylvania to Pueblo, Colorado. But what happened was, as soon as he got here, he did exactly the same thing. He had 4 studios here. He was very popular, very busy, which is why we see so many of his photographs everywhere. But he passed away in 1930, and she lived on for another 40 years after he passed away. So there's a lot of digging that we need to do, and this will, of course, all be part of this future book that we want to do. So these are some of the photos. I don't know if you've seen, this is Mineral Palace. I still wish Mineral Palace was standing there. Does anyone, did it come down in the 1970s? When did they tear down Mineral Palace? I haven't really. It was the 40s that they actually tore it down. Because it's just, I look at this, and it's like when you look at the St. Louis or the Chicago expositions where they built those huge buildings. San Francisco, you have the Pavilion of Fine Arts down in the Presidio, down on the waterfront there. Some of those were saved and they're beautiful. Oftentimes they weren't built very well, but Pueblo's really lucky because we have such dry climate, and we're high altitude. It's very favorable to our buildings. So, but Mineral Palace, these are the tailors, and I encourage you to look at these up close because they're really, really detailed. But Floyd really had a way of capturing, it's almost like he just was in all of these places and no one really noticed that he was even around. And clearly he was a character. He was a character indeed. I'm going to give this to ABC Plumbing because this is a plumbing salesman. She's right there already, and he's ready to sell her a new faucet, a new sink, and a new bathtub. But it's amazing. You go to ABC Plumbing, it's amazing. You go, I don't know where all the stuff is, but they must have bought stuff in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. It's still back there because they have every single part, and for a good price too, and they're really nice. But again, part of these images too aren't just a part of the kind of the immigration story, which of course is the Pueblo story, but the initiative that we're doing next door, this Pueblo PopUp, and some of these images, we really wanted to show just a lot of these enterprises, a lot of these businesses, a lot of these people that are really trying to make ends meet. These stores, it's amazing that, we've lost all the other ABC Plumbing. They've all closed. I think the Springs one, did they finally shut down? A couple of years ago. So we only have this one left because, you have the big box businesses that can easily take over. We still have Rush's. We still have ABC. I was telling Ryan McWilliams, who owns Water Tower Place, we have this building right behind us, the Livestock Hotel. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Rush's and Fox's and ABC could set up in like a European-style artisanal marketplace And of course, the real estate where Rush's is amazing. We could use that for housing. But there's ways in which I think we can save a lot of these businesses, because a lot of the overhead, a lot of the cost is really what just kicks people out. Plus, we have regional building. We have a lot of other things that can be oftentimes excessive. Mr. Medine here could give us a whole lecture for 2 years on the ins and outs of how to get something done.
So, regarding the photograph,
Yeah.
those have to be staged because the shutter speed is so slow.
Right.
They can't be moving.
Well, especially with Mineral Palace. Because if you look at the Mineral Palace one in there, you can see people, the photographer's like going, Floyd's going, don't move, don't move. And so you can see like 75% of the people are moving, and then you have these ghost faces, people that are moving. This is much better. This is Theodore Roosevelt, who came to Pueblo. And Theodore Roosevelt, of course, everyone recognizes him, but when you look at the picture in there, look at the little boy, look at everyone, and then look at these hats. Look at all the people. Again, another time in place. So what's next? So Floyd, Muramoto, Anderson, and Suhey. And this is a publication with the Public County Historical Society. John Wark has also been amazingly cooperative and supportive in this whole effort. He actually, backing up just a little bit, Floyd, when his widow passed away, she had all of these glass plates, all of the photographs just stacked. And after she passed away, someone just didn't think there was any value, threw them in the dump. So they were found and they were brought to the Pueblo County Historical Society. John Wark actually scanned them all and preserved them so that they're digital. And in fact, if you go to John Wark's website, he has a whole section on Pueblo, and then within Pueblo, he has gallery. And what I love that John did is some of these photographs are such high resolution that he went in, and it's called portraits. I thought they were just portraits by Floyd, but no, they were just one person in one of these pictures. And it's amazing because they're beautiful portraits. In fact, we want to do an exhibition called The Faces of Pueblo and just show these because we have the ability to zoom in on these beautiful pictures. So this is where all of this is coming to. We actually have a new t-shirt, a new branding campaign that's going to be taking place, but it's Pueblo, 1 degree of separation. I keep on hearing about Pueblo cousins, real cousins, and how you make decisions, how you problem solve. But at the end of the day, there's something really powerful about 1 degree of separation. And you can define that in a lot of different ways. Another person on our team said, maybe it's Pueblo, where everyone's your cousin. Not in a West Virginia way, but you know everyone. So this is a really Pueblo pop-up, and you can go to pueblopopup.com. Ina Bernard is here. Is Donna in here, or she's next? So Ina Bernard and Donna, and my story was very similar. I had Kadoya Gallery until 2016, and then decided to convert it to a 501c3 and losing the brick and mortar. But Ina and Donna had Artisan Textile Company up in Mesa Junction. Again, a great store, but brick and mortar, it's a beast. But they still have incredible products and things that they want to share, lessons and classes. So, and I don't know if you want to, maybe you can say who's here, or we can go in next door. But what we're trying to do is, like we're doing today, this space is brand new. It's Jeff Medine's new space. And as soon as he said it was kind of going to be ready, we thought, it doesn't need to be ready, because a lot of the spaces we want to use, and you'll hear more about this in the coming weeks, but we just want to use spaces that have just been sitting there. And I mean, look at Fuel and Iron was sitting there. The Holmes Hardware Building was sitting there for decades. And now it's so much fun when you go in there. I just hung a photography exhibition in there from the Southern Colorado Photography Society, if you want to go see it. Similar photos, but by individuals here in Pueblo. But again, it's become this little community center, which is really special because not only is it preserving the space, but it's also got housing upstairs. And I don't know if you've been out to the Fuel Kitchens, which they have about 125 cottage industries that are using. It's on the east side. And then we have Fuel Farm, which I think there's going to be a big announcement soon, and it's exciting because they felt that the farm would not be really ideal downtown. So up on the mesa, I won't say anything else, there's some really interesting talks that are going on with the campground and everything. It's going to be really exciting. So that's Pueblo Pop. But basically, this is the kind of the theme behind Pueblo Pop, is that we envision a Pueblo where the stories of our past fuel economic opportunity for artists, makers, and businesses. Fostering a thriving and connected city, Pueblo PopUp ignites the city's vibrant spirit by transforming spaces into marketplaces. So, and if you go to the website, we dig into that a little bit more. And if you're an artist or a maker, or you have something that you'd like to share, we're going to be taking applications, and we're going to take this on the road really further. That's a thank you, and I think that's the end. I will just say that we have the 12 other topics, which are amazing topics. One of the things that I've really wanted to explore, because we get caught up in modern history. We get caught up in the steel mill, you know, William Palmer and the railroads and steel and meatpacking. But the women who came to Pueblo in the 1700s and the 1800s, Charlene Garcia Sims, she was legendary on the 3rd floor special collections at the library. She ran that floor. She's now at CSU Pueblo in the Aslan Center. And if you're not familiar with the Aslan Center, people now around the world are donating their collections to the Aslan Center because it's one of the few places where such special, interest is being put into this area's history, especially with the land grants. I mean, when do you have a place that has an international boundary with France, Spain, Mexico, Republic of Texas, with the land grants, all of that. So they're doing some amazing work, and every summer they have a 2-day workshop. I went last year. I teach up at the university, and I go up every now and then, but I had never been to the 2-day workshop, and it is extraordinary what they're doing. And these are people from around the world that come to Pueblo for 2 days to share what they're doing in this very specialized area, because this is a Hispanic serving educational institution, and they're really branching out into some interesting areas that are rooted in this area. And Armando Chavez, the new CSU president, who has like 17 generations in the San Luis Valley in Southern Colorado, is really a beautiful kind of, he's stepping in, and I hope it's not just for 2.5 years, because he's filling in for Motey's, departure. But what they're doing is really extraordinary. So we have stories that are going to be going back. And then we have a whole section that we're doing in Aberdeen with some speakers. Because we have a former resident who became the Postmaster General and who became the Secretary of the Interior, and his wife was the only person in the history of the White House who was given a White House funeral who wasn't part of a presidential, family. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into the Teapot Dome scandal. I'm going to be doing that one because the Thatchers were the money launderers of the world, and it's a great story. So we're going to be digging into some of those. We have some performing artists that want to do some talks. And we have a whole series of other things that are really, really interesting. So these are going to be announced over the next few weeks. But we wanted to launch really this one today because it was in conjunction with the Pueblo PopUp, and it's been long overdue. So thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah.